It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much to everybody out there making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 and its great ag lineup a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody else listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. So if you miss an episode of RealAg Radio here on Sirius, the good news is you can always go back and find us on Spotify or Apple Podcast and find our archive, right? Okay, so please do that. Search RealAg Radio. Also, we have Real Agriculture Podcast as well as another podcast feed where, boy, you can gather all of the stuff that we are doing, which is a lot. I think we host one of the biggest podcast networks in agriculture in Canada or the U.S., bar none. And we thank everybody for being a fan of the content that we're making here at Real Agriculture. It's Agronomic Monday today, so we got a lot of ground to cover. Looking forward to talking to Jerry Boychyn of Alberta Grains. Yes, we're going to cover a number of different topics that farmers in Western Canada are definitely battling and being challenged with. There's a lot of adversity out there in our fields this year, for sure in the West. Jeremy's going to be here to discuss a bunch of topics. We're also going to be joined by Sara Meidlinger and Breanne Roy from Pride Seeds in a product spotlight. So looking forward to talking to those two ladies as it is the week of the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, and Pride Seeds is going to be there, and so will we. So we're doing a live taping of this show on Wednesday, which I'm really looking forward to. We're going to be on the stage in front of the audience, have crowd participation. It's going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be joined by the CEO of Tech Canada, Todd Miller. We're going to talk about adversity and steering your business through adverse conditions, right? And how do we make sure that we turn it somewhat into a positive and still instead of always focusing on the negative of it, right? And if you think about the beef community, boy, drought is just one aspect of the adversity that industry has faced. So Wednesday is going to be a lot of fun. We're also going to have time today for some audio from a recent Canola School episode with Clint Jurke of the Canola Council of Canada, talking about Verticillium. So definitely something that some people in the prairies are dealing with when it comes to canola. Pete's still off, still on holidays. He sent me a picture on the weekend, having a great time. That is for sure. Great stuff. Well-deserved holiday for Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media channels, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads. Do we call it Twitter anymore, or is it X? Still getting used to that. Yeah, we are Real Agriculture on all those different platforms. Or you can call the Real Ag feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. I love your feedback on anything we talk about on this show or things that you think need to be talked about. That's your opportunity to dial me up, leave me a voicemail, and let me have it. Good, bad, or indifferent. Want to hear from you out there in the Real Agriculture audience. Now, last week, we talked about a recent Real Agri Studies survey that we had done where we try to gain, what is your sentiment and what's your level of pessimism? Where do you see the opportunities are? How is your business shaping up? Some of the external factors. I think we really do a good job with that Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. And in the open text box, we get some of your feedback, okay? And here's in regard, and we sort of talked about this last week with some of the Greenbelt stuff, right? In terms of development and farmland, things like that. Well, a big issue, more so, and this is much more of a political topic in the U.S. right now, foreign ownership of farmland. So somebody chimes in here, concern regarding no control on foreign ownership. There is no free market when we are competing with foreign government-backed companies for land or ag businesses. So that is a very timely comment right now. And a lot of this has to do with, if you look in the U.S., there is potential legislation that's being pushed from, honestly, kind of bipartisan agreement on it, for the most part, at a high level at least, that there needs to be some pushback here when we're talking about adversarial countries and ownership of something like farmland. And some would even say, we should have been more proactive. You think about like Smithfield being owned by a Chinese company, as an example. We've had situations here in Canada where the acquisitions have been tried to be made of some of our natural resource companies, and the government has had to step in and put a kibosh to it. So I think it's a very timely one. I'm not sure how much of the Canadian farmland is owned by foreign entities. I think one of the challenges here too is that sometimes it may look like that farmer is a local, but the financing, the money, basically being backed by potentially larger players, some of them domestic and some of them foreign. And then there's the gray area. And this has been a big point in the U.S. discussion of all this, when we talk about foreign ownership of farmland, does the U.S. need to be concerned when someone from Canada or Mexico is buying that farmland? We're not exactly in the same category as, say, China, but and then there could be a bit of a debate on that. Now, Saskatchewan has maybe the toughest farm ownership structures. And part of that has to do with residency, I believe, in Saskatchewan. So every province kind of looks at this a little bit different, as in the U.S., where there's differences from state to state, I am sure, as well. Now, when it comes to how you feel about the ag outlook for just the overall ag economy, here somebody said, concerned with drought and how the government is going forward with sustainable agriculture, what the future cost to my operation will be. Now, we talked about this on Friday's show, and we talked about that potential mandate letter for new Ag Minister Lawrence MacAulay. And Kelvin made this point regarding the sustainable ag strategy, provide clarity, because I think there's some concern out in farm country that there's maybe going to be a bit of a lack of practicality and an increased cost pushed again on producers at a time where they're very concerned about increasing costs, right, in this inflationary environment. And I think a lot of farmers across the country, I think that this sustainable ag strategy, and maybe not even if you haven't been following that whole strategy development, maybe it's just the fact that there's so much influence in government policy from environment and climate change from that ministry, and that always has a way of working its way into impacting our industry of agriculture. There's a bit of a crossing there, right? All these different departments aren't mutually exclusive of each other. There's things that environment's going to push that it's going to work its way into agriculture, because farmers are the ones that are taking care of the land and in many ways water, and we're stakeholders in this. I think that has a real that hangs over people, and they assume the worst. Now, should we assume the worst? Maybe not, but I see how people do that, right? Because there are examples of where this has not worked in the industry's favor. So I think that sustainable ag strategy and that whole area is a real concern for the industry. So yeah, just a few pieces of feedback from you. We got time for one more. Somebody else said, we ask about mental health. So is your mental health better, the same, or worse than this time 12 months ago? Okay. And here's a comment. My mental health would be a lot better if I was making more money instead of barely breaking even or going in the red. Consolidation in the ag sector has led to many problems, and it seems governments don't want to address these issues. So, yeah, I think, and I mentioned beef. I think for a lot of the ranching community, this would be a big concern. Facing drought conditions again. Even in some of these areas, things were a lot better than they were, say, the last 2, 3, 4 years. But we really haven't seen Mother Nature continue with some of that moisture through the season. And if you depending on how you do feel, if you do feel that money would, breaking even would sort of allow you to take a bit of a breath, definitely do a bit of a self-check in terms of making sure you're seeking help if you do need to. And we've been asked, that question's been very stable in terms of how people can feel compared to a year ago. So that's been encouraging. But I know that these are tough times that people are going through in some of these geographies. So I think it's important that we still bring it up. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. We're talking agronomy right after this.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, fava beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Joining us right now to break down a bunch of agronomic topics is Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. Jeremy, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, Sean. How are you today?
Good. I'm still getting used to saying Alberta Grains and not Alberta Wheat Commission, but I did it right this time, which I'm kind of proud of myself. So, hey, it's great to have you back here on the show, Jeremy. A lot's going on, and of course, drought is taking up a lot of the discussion in the Prairie provinces. Indeed. You've been doing a lot of different field days as of late. What have you been hearing from the farmers that attend, or some of the researchers that you're corresponding with at those sites?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of topics going on at these field days, and some of the stuff that's been coming up. Last week or earlier this week, I was up at the Gateway Research Organization field day, and we were lucky enough to have Breanne, who's an AFC researcher, out of the Lacombe there, talking about weed management. And one of the topics that came out of this is even in the northern part of the province, producers really need to be on the lookout for kochia. And I think there's this general concept that kochia is more prevalent in the south and wild oats is more of an issue in the center and northern part of the province, which generally that's what we see. But I think producers should certainly be, when they're in the north, still maintaining an eye on kochia popping up in their fields. As I drive by Edmonton, you can see that there's areas where they're doing construction where there's certainly huge swaths of kochia popping up there. So generally we're going to see these popping up in oil lease entrances where maybe it's a little bit drier and gravelier. And I think it's important to keep in mind that if that's the case and that's where we're seeing them, there's a high likelihood that these are coming in from seeds from somewhere else. And the risk is that they're likely bringing resistance with them. So we should be keeping an eye on them and assume that there is some resistance in these kochia if they are popping up in these areas. So a good reminder from our weed experts that we really should be keeping an eye in these areas.
Traditionally, what prevented kochia from being in more central northern areas of the province of Alberta? Because when I hear kochia, I think like a very, very hardy, resilient plant that seems to grow in any bloody condition. We could have the worst drought in the world, and you still see this kochia tree coming out of the ground. So what's kind of prevented it from moving north at a faster rate?
Yeah, I think that it's a very good biology question of where's the best place for this species to grow. And I'd probably be speaking well beyond my knowledge of the exact biology, what may be holding it back. But I think just because it has better opportunity in those drier regions and lighter soil and warmer temperatures. It's not that it couldn't grow in the north, it's just not as prevalent there. And maybe there was some other weeds that were maybe taking some of that space before kochia having a little bit more of a presence there. So I think it's not that it couldn't grow there or something was stopping it. It's just it's taken a little bit for it to move into some of those areas through whichever distribution method is taking. But now that it's there, I imagine we'll be hearing more and more about it. So producers should be monitoring. It's
that time of the year we got to start to think about, are we going to try winter crops? Of course, there is options, winter trit. There's also winter wheat, winter rye. But when we're doing that, as eventually we're going to finish harvest here, and harvest could be done a little bit early in some parts based on some of the drought, and people want to be taking advantage of potentially some fall moisture. We got to be thinking about green bridge. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I reached out to Michael Harding of Alberta Agriculture and asked him what he was seeing. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. I bugged him. He said one of the things that's really popping up this year and growing in prevalence, specifically in those irrigated parts of the province, is wheat streak mosaic virus. And we know that this comes from the wheat curl mite, from having a green bridge present. So the wheat curl mite who would feed on the spring wheat crop, it needs green material to survive. So if we have that green material from the spring wheat crop still alive, and then we have green material either from weeds or from the winter wheat crop that we seed close to the end of that spring wheat crop, there's a chance that we're going to get that wheat curl mite jumping into the winter wheat crop and spreading that wheat streak mosaic virus. And wheat streak mosaic virus can cause pretty significant impacts on yield. Generally, we don't see a huge impact. It's relatively small areas, but we know historically it can be pretty impactful. So just something for producers to keep in mind. Generally, we want to see that, week gap or 2 week gap between that spring wheat crop and that winter wheat crop, and making sure that there's no green material, specifically cereals, that wheat curl mite can move between those crops. And the other option is to use, if you are looking at winter wheat, a resistant variety such as Elevate or Radiant. But I think it's something that generally hasn't moved too quickly or caused too much of an issue. But seeing as we're seeing in that specific area an increase in incidence, it's probably something that producers should be keeping a closer eye on and making sure we're not allowing those populations and that disease to get out of hand, because it can cause pretty significant impacts.
Radiant, still kicking around, eh?
Probably not, but unfortunately, those are the only two options we have at this point that have that resistance. So, but yeah.
Rob Graff's listening, and he's got a big smile on his face. Okay, wild oats and checking for resistance. Is this the right timing to do that right now?
Absolutely. As you drive across the province, especially in the north part, we're seeing those panicles popping over the canopy. You're seeing where there's either escapes or resistance occurring. So now is a great time to drive around your field and see if you're seeing patches that could potentially be resistant. And, we had a rather challenging year when it came to making decisions on when to spray. Things were bone dry. Nothing was emerging. Nothing was popping up in terms of weeds. So some spraying occurred before that wild oat flush happened. So in some of these situations, it may just be a late flush that came through after application. But if you do know that there was a flush out when you made that in-crop herbicide application in your cereals and you're seeing those panicles pop up in specific patches, now is a great time to take a look and assess whether you potentially have a risk of resistance. We know through the resistance weed surveys that they've been doing across the province that the amount of resistance is going up. So the risk of these patches being resistant is relatively high. So we want to capture those and get an idea of whether resistance is occurring before it spreads. So taking some of those seed samples, collecting them and distributing them or sending them off to some of the labs that can do that testing, like AgQuest and AAFC Lethbridge. If you go to the Resistant Wild Oat Action Committee website, which is on weedscience.ca, they do have a list of places that you can send them. You can send them to whichever ones are in the best proximity or based on price, and then get an idea of what kind of resistance that you're dealing with. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you do suspect resistance and you do suspect a patch that has emerged and could be a risk, is to think about how you're going to harvest that area, because we know through research that driving a combine through a resistant patch is only going to spread that resistance and make it worse in the field. So if you do have a risk area, potentially disconnecting that chopper or even mowing that area if it's small enough, even after those panicles have popped up and matured, reducing the size and spread of that resistance is going to help you manage it in the future. Because if you do get results back that say that it is resistant, you know that you've cut that patch smaller, and you do have more options for managing it in the future. Where if we drive through it with a combine, I believe the number is about 200 meters of a spread that can happen when driving a combine through resistant seed. So it can spread pretty far. So distributing it across the field is what we want to avoid.
Oh man, these resistant weeds, the easiest or the best way probably to put it, they suck. Like they really do. And weeds are yield robbers to begin with. And then you add on top the complexity of resistance in that and how challenging it is to win some of these battles, or at least feel like you're winning. Yeah, it gives you just a bloody headache.
Well, you can see that in the research community, we're looking for other opportunities to manage these weeds. And one of the ones that comes to mind is Breanne Tideman's research looking at can we find better resistant varieties or better competitive varieties of cereals to manage some of these things, because compare spring wheat to winter wheat, and the amount of competitive advantage that these crops have with some of these weeds puts us at an advantage and really reduces the amount of weight that we have to put on our herbicides, because we know that the more weight and the more expectation we have on those herbicides to control everything, the greater the selection pressure becomes on those weeds, and the bigger potential for those weeds to become resistant occurs. So the research community looking at different opportunities to distribute the weight and think of herbicides as part of the toolbox, along with many other management practices, which we know we already have some of those management practices, like narrower row spacing and higher seeding rates, and good rotation and putting in fall crops, silaging crops, things like that. But if we can continue to find new tools that fit into a wider range of cropping systems in Western Canada, we can reduce the amount of pressure that we need to put on our herbicides to manage some of these weeds. And create more potential for resistance.
Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Make sure you go to borax.com. That is Granubor from US Borax. We got more of my conversation with Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. When we come back, you're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Low-rate MBPT solutions claim to protect nitrogen, but no imitator products deliver, like Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next-gen urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. See how others stack up to the proven power for Anvil at defendyourn.ca. Our guest here on RealAg Radio is Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. Jeremy, to wrap up, wanted to ask you about something that I think a lot of growers are challenged by this year as we look across the prairies, especially the areas where we were not off to a good start, and then maybe we got a rain kind of like at an untimely spot, and we've created this sort of staginess in the field. And of course, that creates a lot of challenges or havoc, kind of depending on how bad it is at harvest time. When it comes to staginess and multi-stages in the same field, what are some harvest strategies we need to think about?
Sean, I've seen staginess before. This is something different. This is a challenge that I haven't approached before on the scale that I saw it when I was up near the Edmonton area. And what you've described is exactly the reason. We started off very dry, and those cereal crops went into enormous amount of stress. And to cope with that stress, they threw their tillers out much quicker. And we saw those crops advancing faster than they usually do. We lost tillers, but the tillers that we had, they moved quickly. And then mid-June, late June, we started getting rains. And those rains have continued, which has been great. We've been able to restock that soil, and we're in good situation to get a decent yield. But what we see now is two crop stages from the same plant across the entire field, where you have one that is the earlier tillers that were thrown out during stress, and then depending on the variety, you have a second stage that's sitting 6-8 inches above that initial tiller head, those initial tiller heads. So hidden underneath the canopy, you have those early tillers, and above that, you have the later tillers, which could be 1 to 2 weeks behind. So now we're left in a situation where it's not just parts of the field where there's late tillers. It is the entire field where there's a late tiller presence. And, at the field that I walked into, those late tillers look like they could easily account for 40% of the yield. So this isn't something that we just want to avoid or not manage. It needs to be part of the management decision because it is a large portion of the yield. It's almost equally distributed between those earlier tillers and later tillers. So producers are in a situation where, gosh, we are fingers crossed for an open fall, because if this becomes a challenge where fall puts pressure on us, it's going to wreak havoc for getting that crop off on time. We're going to be dealing with greens. We're going to be dealing with quality issues. So, I mean, first off, go out and take a peek at your field, see what you're dealing with, see what are you getting those late tillers? What's the staging difference? And what kind of timing are you looking at? Because if you are dealing with a heavy late tiller load, you're likely going to want to have to delay, or you're going to want to delay that harvest timing to make sure that you're capturing that yield. So what stage is that at? While that earlier tiller, those earlier tillers are getting closer to 30%. Where is that later tiller? Are you in early dough? Are you in mid dough? In those two stages, you're looking at somewhere in 55 to 45% moisture. And we're looking at in the range of 1% to 2% dry down per day in those warmer, sunnier days, 2% in those cooler, higher moisture days. You might get 1% dry down. So that can give you an idea of, okay, how many days until I get to that 30-35% moisture? Can I be using swathing to help kind of bring this together? But then there's the risk of pre-harvest sprouting if you're dropping that down. So hopefully we're going to see an open fall here so we can save that later portion of the crop. But the first thing that producers need to do is go take a look, see what they're dealing with. What can their market handle? Where are they sending this crop? Do they need to be more cautious on, whether they're dealing with greens, whether they're dealing with a little bit of sprouting? And then they can make a management decision based on the tools that they have in terms of dryers or swathers, or whether they need to wait and do a straight cut. But it will be a case-by-case basis. But the first thing is for producers and agronomists to assess what's actually there.
Great stuff. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio, and look forward to chatting again soon, bud.
Thanks, Sean. That
is Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. And if you want to catch more great content with Jeremy, he comes on the Agronomist, he comes on RealAg Radio, but you'll see him the most frequently at the Wheat School. It is brought to you by Alberta Grains, Syngenta Canada, and C&M Seeds. Go to wheatschool.com. You can find our entire library, not just for this season, but past seasons, by going to wheatschool.com, or you can find it also on our YouTube channel. We'll be back with more of RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday right after this.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time for a product spotlight with Pride Seeds. And we're joined right now by the Western team with Pride Seeds. Up first is Breanne Ray. She's market development agronomist for Manitoba and Eastern Saskatchewan with Pride, as well as Sara Meidlinger, who is the market development agronomist for Western Saskatchewan and Alberta. Breanne and Sara, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, exciting this week, and I'm looking forward to being there as well. The Canadian Beef Industry Conference is happening this week in Calgary, Alberta, down at Stampede Park. Looking forward to, we'll be broadcasting RealAg Radio on Wednesday from the conference. Sara, when you think about a conference like CBIC, what makes you so excited?
I'm really excited to just have a booth there and get to talk to growers. They're going to be growers from all across Canada. So just get to hear about how their season's going, I guess, for the most part, how pastures are going, how crops are looking, and then just kind of hear the good, the bad, the ugly of what's going on in their operation just to get a better understanding. Yeah,
and a lot of different sizes and shapes of producers too. There'll be ranchers there. There'll be feed yards there, backgrounders. So everybody, of course, lots of opportunity for Pride hybrids to be discussed for sure. Breanne, how about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to networking with a lot of those growers too. And then one thing I'm really excited for is with Pride, we really value those educational opportunities and networking opportunities. So really excited to attend some of those sessions and talk to growers who value those things as well.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the products at Pride Seeds. There's a great portfolio of some fantastic hybrids when we think about corn. And one of the neat things here too is the multi-uses and deciding how, what is my intention for this crop? What am I trying to do? And what kind of flexibility do I need? Or do I have it pretty well figured out before I even put the seed in the ground? And of course, we're into fall here, which is when we got to think about 24 planting. It feels a little bit weird. 23 crops not even off, but that's the way the business goes. Sara, from your perspective, let's talk about growing corn for silage and some of the product opportunities that you have in your portfolio.
For sure. So even if I say you're whether growing for silage or for grazing corn, depending on your operation, I probably recommend a silage-specific product. So these are products that are going to have a little bit of a wider harvest window. They're going to be really top-end yielding, high palatability, and good fiber digestibility. So 2 new products in our lineup are AS 1018 G2 rib and AS 1028 G2 rib. And both of these are silage products that have really great yield. They can be used, all across the area that I cover of Western Saskatchewan and Alberta. And then they also provide you with above ground insect protection, which can be really helpful if you're growing a lot of corn on corn or if you just want to try to manage your risk.
Now, Breanne, there's also the opportunity where we can grow a hybrid and we could maybe use it for silage, but also potentially use it for grain corn. Talk about those flexible hybrids.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So in our lineup, we have a lot of dual purpose options and then a lot of more grain specific options. So some of the products that I'll talk about today are 2 new products that are maybe more specific to that grain acre. So the first one would be A4494 G2. So that's a shorter season option. So you could use it for silage or grazing, depending on your area. It does have that flexibility, but mostly for grain. So it's a 2250 heat unit product. It has really good emergence, but what I love most about this product is that it has really top end yield. So it can compete with products above its maturity class. So really excited that we're actually going to be able to sell it this fall and see how it performs next year.
Yeah, if any of the hybrids mentioned here, Breanne, where do growers go to talk to their retail point or find out more?
Yeah, you can definitely check out our website. We just got an updated website, so all of our plot data is all on that new website, and you can just search for specific hybrids, and everything should be there. Or reach out to myself or Sara for more information. Yeah,
and we should also make the point here too that, Sara, when we look at the Pride team, you have people across the country, looking to help growers out. Make sure you select the right hybrid for the purpose and the soil type and all of those kinds of things. Really customizing it down to the farm level.
Yeah, exactly, Sean. You nailed it. Team all the way from Breanne and I all the way to the East Coast. So we've got the team in Quebec and the Great Ontario team. So lots of help. The agronomists are always there for any of your agronomic needs. Regional managers are going to make sure that we have the supply for the corn that you're looking for.
And of course, Pride Seeds also the sponsor of our Corn School. So you can check that out at cornschool.com. Breanne and Sara, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great stuff. That is Pride Seeds. So you got any questions, make sure you talk to your local retailer or reach out on the company website. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio on Agronomic Monday right after this.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word. And I love doing the word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
We talk about diseases on the farm in our crops. Some of them sound kind of mild from a name standpoint. I find Verticillium just sounds like it's bad. It's like, you do not want Verticillium, let me tell you. Now, it is, all joking aside, it is an issue that canola growers in Western Canada do need to be thinking about and be aware of. And make sure when you're identifying it, you don't make that mistake of misdiagnosing it as blackleg, which can also happen for sure. On a recent canola episode, or I should say a canola school episode, brought to you by Invigor Hybrid Canola and BASF Canada, Carrie Rooster, host of Real Agriculture, had a chance to talk to the Canola Council of Canada's Clint Jurke, and they're going to talk about all things you need to know about Verticillium.
I have here to be Clint Jurke of the Canola Council of Canada. How's it going today?
Very good, Kara. Great day to be outside.
Absolutely. Well, the wind's blowing, but hey, we're used to it.
We're surviving.
Yeah. So we're here today to talk about Verticillium. Now, Verticillium stripe specifically.
Yep.
Producers have likely heard about Verticillium wilt as well. Do you want to kind of talk about what Verticillium stripe is and why it's not wilt?
Yeah, so Verticillium wilt is a well-known global disease. It affects a lot of different crops. It's caused by a fungus called Verticillium dahliae, and once it infects roots, it basically plugs up the plant's roots and plants wilt, and that's why it's called that. What we're dealing with in canola, though, is caused by a different fungus. It's Verticillium longisporum, so it's not the same species of pathogen, and it causes a different type of result. It doesn't plug up the roots, it plugs up the stems, and as a result we see a striping type of effect. We don't see the whole plant just wilt over anymore. So internationally this pathogen has been recognized as, well, this is different, and so internationally they're calling it different. Some countries, I think they call it Verticillium stem striping. Here in Canada we're calling it Verticillium stripe.
Okay, and that's the one that we found, or you guys found in Winnipeg area?
Yeah. In 2014, a field south of Winnipeg, this disease was first observed in canola, and it was sent to a lab, and very quickly the industry reacted to it, both working with the federal government, with the CFIA, and the entire industry. We found out that, in fact, this pathogen is ubiquitous. Like it's from the east coast of the country to the west coast, but unfortunately for Manitoba, it seems to be a little heavier there. Like the soil infestation levels are much higher there than they are where we are here in Alberta.
However, we are seeing it in Alberta, correct?
Yes, yeah, we are seeing it here for sure, and but because it's something that's fairly new, like for the Manitobans, I think that they're actually getting pretty good at recognizing it and how it looks different than blackleg, but it does have some features that make it pretty easily to interpret it as blackleg earlier in the season.
So talk about what it can actually do to your crop. Like, how does it impact it?
Yeah, so it's a fungus. It's in the soil. It's like a lot of the other soil diseases like Fusarium, Rhizoctonia, Pythium. It infects roots, but what makes this one different is, like Fusarium in canola usually just infects roots and causes root rots and things like that. This one, it starts growing up the stem immediately, and then it starts plugging up the vascular tissue, so the piping lining within a canola stem that moves water and nutrients up and down. And so once it fills that up with the fungal body, the mycelium, that part of the plant dies off. And so then usually you'll see like a stripe on the plant, like where it gets into that part of the stem, it's just that whole part of the plant dies. So that's how it gets in. And that's also what makes this disease kind of a bad thing compared to some of the other soil-borne diseases. Like most soil-borne diseases, they kind of stay with the root. This one being in the stem, it actually produces these hardened fungal bodies at the end of the season called microsclerotia. When we hear the word sclerotia, I think we often think of sclerotinia. They produce sclerosias, which are fairly big chunks of mycelium. These are really tiny. These are not quite microscopic, but they are smaller than pepper. These microsclerotia, they're produced in the stem, and then when we harvest this crop, unfortunately, those stems go through a combine operation, and those microsclerotia get dispersed quite widely. So that's the real challenge with this particular disease, unfortunately.
So is that typically where you see the most spread, is when it comes to harvest?
Yeah, well, when we see the disease manifests itself, the symptoms most right at harvest time. When the combines are in the field, that's when those microsclerotia are really produced. They've matured, and the plants start falling apart. So that's usually when we see the majority of the disease. When we're looking for other diseases like sclerotinia, clubroot blackleg, we're usually looking at when the plants are kind of swathing time, that 60% seed color change. That's a little early to be looking for verticillium because it hasn't fully expressed like those microsclerotia type of symptoms. So, yeah.
Control options, is there anything out there?
No. Unfortunately, the verticillium suite of diseases like verticillium wilt, verticillium stripe, there's no fungicides that work on it. We wish that was the case. The only ray of hope that we kind of have right now is in resistance. The research that's undergoing right now, we are seeing yield losses in Manitoba, unfortunately, but it looks like there is some resistance in germplasm that's out there. In actual varieties, I don't know quite yet, but we're working with the industry to develop a rating system so that we can actually start telling folks when we do have real resistance coming along. But that might be our ray of hope, but we're going to be a ways away from having any real resistance to controlling this disease.
And we're not trying to fearmonger here or anything, but any words of advice if people haven't seen verticillium, are we going down the same road that we did with clubroot, or is it like...
It is severe in Manitoba, but it's still new. Like, there's a lot that we don't know. So last year, it looked like it was a bad year. And maybe it has to do with the environmental conditions that we saw last year in that area. It was a fairly wet start, and the soils were warm, which seems to be the conditions that this pathogen really infects roots. So wet, warm soils. The disease in most of Saskatchewan and Alberta, it's not really severe yet. So I think that we have a window of opportunity, and hopefully the life science companies will have some good resistance that's coming down. Like I said, the germplasm screening was actually really promising. That it looks like there is some good stuff, but when we're actually going to see that in varieties that we can buy, hopefully it's sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Okay, anything else you'd like to add?
Just that this disease can be a little bit confusing with identification. I would really encourage any farmers or agronomists, when you're out looking for pathogens at the end of the season, try to actually figure out if you do have disease in your field, so that next time you're growing canola in that field or fields adjacent, that you can choose the right varieties that are going to deal with those diseases going ahead. Definitely go through that operation. But if you need some help with identifying some of these things, check out some of our resources at the Canola Council. Their Canola Encyclopedia has way more information than you'd ever want to see on verticillium, but it's all there, or our Canola Watch newsletter.
When it comes to the productivity and efficiency of your operation, every decision counts. One of these decisions is how you fuel your equipment. You need to be sure that it will run efficiently and without unnecessary downtime. Count on Co-op and your local Co-op fuel team member to keep your equipment running smoothly with seasonally blended high-quality fuels and premium lubricants with guaranteed performance. We are Western Canadian. We are fueling harvest. We are Co-op. Go to fuel.crs to learn more. In some parts of North America, it's been very hot. very hot. Like Arizona's like on week 6 of plus 110. Like that's insufferable. Now, interesting perspective and numbers here from Matt Makins, who is a meteorologist with Makins Weather LLC. We've had him here on the show before. I think he's a great communicator. He has a LinkedIn post where he said, hey, here's some perspective on the hot topic this summer, heat. I'm showing 3 images, and you can see them in the post, so just bear with me. July temperatures, June through July temperatures, and year-to-date temperatures for the 3 images. This is for the U.S., okay? These images show how temperature during these periods ranks historically. So this data goes back to 1895. So, officially in the NCDC report books, we have the following. Okay. It is the hottest July on record since 1895 for Arizona, New Mexico, Florida, and Maine. It is actually only the 4th warmest for Texas. So Texas has been here before. He also says for June and July, Texas is the 6th warmest since 1895. For January through July, the only record is Florida, with this being the hottest such period on their record. The year-to-date remains cooler than average, despite recent hot weather for parts of the West. And what's interesting as you kind of look at it here is that when you get to the northern, the northern plains, and I'm assuming some of that would carry over into Western Canada, it's within a normal range. It actually hasn't necessarily been any hotter than normal. And actually, there's a few spots in on eastern North Dakota where it's actually been cooler than normal. California, definitely not hotter. So you can really, really see the differences going all the way back to 1895 as far as what that looks like. So yeah, sometimes we have some recency bias when we're putting some of these things together, and watching the news at night. They don't do any. They want to make you feel like, yes, it's never been hotter ever. Just wish they would provide some of the perspective, like people like Matt Makins do, in terms of some of that for sure. Hey, would love your feedback. Need your feedback. We got a number of different issues that are going to be talked about this week, and remember that we will be at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference on Wednesday. Looking forward to that live recording of the show. It's going to be so much fun. We got Tech Canada CEO Todd Miller. We're also going to have a farmer panel of a feedlot owner, a rancher, and one more, putting it together. And we're going to focus on dealing with adversity. I'm looking so forward to this because this is a topic that I think, we just sort of assume it happens, and there can be some business operational and more strategy involved in pushing through adverse periods. Okay. So we're going to focus on that. I think it's going to be really, really cool and interesting. So stay tuned for that this week on Wednesday's show. And there's a lot of things happening as we're really right now in the peak of the dog days of summer. So we encourage you to provide your feedback, thoughts, commentary, and perspectives on a number of different issues that are impacting you. How do you do that? 1, you send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. What you can also do is find us across all the different social media channels, or you can, of course, call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Tomorrow, Lindsay Smith will be back as your host for the show, and I'll be back for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll, of course, talk to you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.